This is one of a series of good answers presentations, offering evidence to answer skeptical challenges to the Bible's accuracy. Ever since the rise of rationalism, and especially since Charles Darwin, attacks on the Bible have become commonplace. We hear that it's just an ancient book filled with superstition, legend, and outright fiction. In an age of science, the voices decrying this ancient holy book are many and insistent. The book of Genesis, with its account of creation by the word of an omnipotent deity, and of plants and animals formed by him in 6 days, is regularly derided. The evidence is irrefutable, they say, that all life evolved from simpler forms, and we ourselves are just the most recent stage in an ever-developing, ever more complex tree of living things. Evolution is not theory. It is plain, solid fact. But is it? For 30 years as a tenured professor at a major university, I thought so. But then I was challenged to examine the actual evidence, and after 5 years of concentrated research, I was forced to change my long-held view. Let me share just a tiny sampling of the reasons for that change. First, understand that my research did not lead me to question science. Physics, chemistry, astronomy, biology, anatomy, history, archaeology, all these are grounded in scientific method, and all of them continue to increase our knowledge of the world and ourselves. What I did question was the idea that all of the scientific disciplines are consistent with evolution, and that together they form a vast structure with evolution as its capstone. What I found instead was that evolution's supporting structure was riddled with weaknesses and outright holes, and when I poked at a few of them, the whole structure came down. The sciences endure. Darwinism does not. Holes in Darwinism? Puzzles that evolution can't solve? Let's look at just 4 of them. Here's one fundamental assumption of evolutionary theory. Evolution moves in tiny, gradual steps over millions of years. But here, in turn, is a puzzle for any who believe that assumption. Birds' lungs. We all know how our lungs function. Inflating and deflating, they draw in air and absorb some of its oxygen content, to be carried by the bloodstream throughout our bodies to nourish our tissues and sustain life. In turn, carbon dioxide is extracted from our blood and expelled as waste. With every breath we take and every one we expel, this cycle of life continues, from a baby's first cry in the hands of the doctor until our last exhalation. Breathing is the measure of our lives. And so it is with all mammals, all reptiles, all amphibians. Birds too, of course. But with them, it's different. In fact, radically different. Here's how their breathing process works. The bird takes a breath, and that air goes not into the lungs, but into an air sac at the lower part of its abdomen. That sac has inflated to draw in the air. Then the bird exhales. The air in that sac is squeezed out into the bird's actual lungs. But the lungs are not like ours. They don't inflate and deflate like bellows. Rather, they are like a cluster of plastic pipes. The air moves into them, and the exchange of gases, oxygen for CO2, takes place. Then the bird takes another breath. A second air sac in the bird's chest expands to draw in that air that has just been in the lungs. And finally, when the bird exhales a second time, that one bit of air finally completes its journey through the bird. So a bird inhales and exhales twice to complete one breathing cycle. And do you see the other crucial difference from our lungs? This is a one-way system. We breathe in, and then the air reverses direction as we breathe out. In the bird, the air moves always in the same direction. It's totally different from all other breathing animals. Dr. Michael Denton is both an MD and a PhD. In his book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, he says, "No lung in any other vertebrate species is known which in any way approaches the avian system." What if we draw that contrast with, say, reptiles? When we look into the anatomy of a turtle, for example, we see something entirely familiar. It's equipped with a pair of lungs very like ours, and that function in just the same way. In, out, in, out. But evolution tells us that simpler creatures evolved over countless generations into more complex ones. And the textbooks tell us that it was dinosaurs, like this theropod, the famous T-Rex, that evolved into birds. Do you see a problem here? Evolution says that change occurs in tiny increments, very slowly, over many generations. Thousands or even millions of years are involved. But we're examining breathing here. It has to continue uninterrupted even by a few minutes, or we die. And yet, we're expected to believe that a bellows type of breathing system changed into a one-way flow system, and somehow continued to function while such a radical reorganization occurred. If at any point in that long sequence evolutionary change produced something inefficient, the animal would just die. This is a construction delay of catastrophic proportions. Dr. Michael Denton again. Altogether, it adds up to an enormous conceptual difficulty in envisaging how a reptile could have been gradually converted into a bird. Where are we here? Not only is there an absence of fossil evidence showing how dinosaurs changed into birds, we cannot even imagine how such a change could occur. At this point, though, a question might arise. Someone may say, "Okay, birds have a completely different breathing system from everything else we know about. And you're probably going to say that God made them that way. But why? Why give them something that's unique in the world?" And here's the answer. In the bird's lungs, the blood is oxygenated by fine air capillaries, where air and blood flow in opposite directions. Owing to this counterflow, the oxygenated blood that leaves the bird lung acquires a higher oxygen concentration than that corresponding to the oxygen pressure in the expired or exhaled air. And what do birds do that the rest of us don't? They fly high. Migrating mallard ducks fly at 21,000 feet. Swans at 27,000. Vultures even cruise to 36,000 feet. That's more than a mile higher than Mount Everest. And they're not resting at those altitudes. They are burning energy at a high rate to maintain flight. They can only do it because God has given them a breathing system more efficient than any other in the living world. They were designed to do what other creatures can't. Here's another of Darwinism's fundamental assumptions. Life began with simple organisms, gradually developing more complexity. But will it hold up? How about when we consider blood clotting? We all have had that first time when we got a scrape or cut, though generally we don't remember it. "I'm bleeding! Help!" We survive, though. That time, and the next, and the next. And somewhere along the way, somebody explained to us how it all works. It was simple, they said. Yes, you have a break in your skin, and you start to bleed. But look, as soon as your blood comes into contact with the air, it starts to harden. A clot forms, and the bleeding stops. Just like magic. And gradually, that clot hardens until it's a tough scab, protecting the wound. And now, leave it alone. Don't pick at it. That's what my mother would say. The skin will heal under it, and the scab will drop off, and you'll be as good as new. Until the next time. Oh my, so nice and simple, so magical. But the truth is, it's a lot more complicated than that. Let's have a look. Here's a simplified chart of the process, and a first glance at it shows that we are looking at a string of actions. Each event triggers another, and that one a third, and so on. Like a chain of dominoes, we're seeing what's called a cascade reaction. Follow the sequence here. Injured tissues and platelets release the clotting factor, prothrombin activator, and calcium ions. That prothrombin activator converts the blood protein prothrombin to thrombin. Thrombin, in turn, splits fibrinogen to form fibrin, and the fibrin fibers form a mesh over the wound, trapping red blood cells and platelets. The bleeding stops. Not so simple, huh? And the cascade reaction continues. Once the clot has formed, it begins to harden and shrink. Then new cells begin to grow to replace the wound site. And in time, when the healing process is far enough along, another enzyme, plasmin, is released to detach the scab. But I said this was a simplified chart, and it is. It shows the sequence of events, but not what drives the sequence. Stop a second and think about that. The thrombin, once released, triggers the formation of countless fibers in the bloodstream. But why does it only work right here? Its function is to react with fibrinogen and produce those fibers. And fibrinogen is everywhere in your bloodstream. Why doesn't that chemical reaction spread throughout your body? If it did, of course, all of your blood would solidify. That would be the end of you, right there. There has to be a reaction that neutralizes the thrombin to limit its work just to the area where a clot is needed. What stops the thrombin from continuing its activity, filling all of your blood with fibers to produce clots? An enzyme started the reaction, and another one has to stop it. And that's true all the way through the sequence. Under the clot, new skin cells start to grow. What signals that process to start? And what makes it stop when the wound area is healed? And what enzyme causes the clot to loosen and fall off? And where does that enzyme come from? When we examine the whole process, some 20 enzymes are involved in the sequence, each one triggered by an earlier action, and serving in turn to produce a following reaction. And all of them have to occur at just the right time in just the right order without fail. If one link in the chain fails, the whole process fails. And if it does fail, even once, you're dead. But what was that rule of evolution we saw? Life begins with simple organisms and processes, gradually developing more complexity. How could the blood coagulation cascade have developed from something simpler, when every step in the chain is vital to what comes before and after? Lacking any link, the entire process fails. And yet, Darwinism insists that it must have come from something much simpler and been enhanced a bit at a time by a blind process of mutation and selection. Evolutionists may say so, but we are more likely to agree with molecular biologist Michael Behe, who argues in his book Darwin's Black Box that no one, not even biochemists who have spent their careers studying the clotting system, has any idea how the system might have evolved. They know how it works, right down to the molecules, and that study shows that it must be complete in every part in order to work at all. He concludes, the fact is, no one on earth has the vaguest idea how the coagulation cascade came to be. Let's test another of Darwinism's basic tenets. Humans developed from ape-like creatures, taking on clearly human anatomical form around 100,000 years ago. How does this assertion square with the Laetoli footprints? You may know that geologists, paleontologists, and other scientists who deal with fossils have a chronic frustration. They want to find fossils, of course, and they want to be able to date them. And they do have radiometric methods of dating igneous rock. But fossils are not found there. One finds them in sedimentary rock. So, they can date rock that has no fossils, and they can find fossils but only in undateable rock. Doubtless, that's quite a pain. But there are occasional bits of good luck, and the Laetoli footprints are an example of that. It was associates of Mary Leakey, one of the most well-known of the paleoanthropologists, who discovered this fossil trackway in Tanzania in 1978. The tracks are found in a layer of volcanic ash, and the stroke of good luck is that this layer is sandwiched in between layers of igneous rock. So, radiometric dating can be used on the layers above and below the footprints, and by that method they show as between 3.6 and 3.8 million years old. As you can see from the photograph, there are 3 trails, left, say the experts, by 3 individuals. Mary Leakey expressed the view that they were made by Australopithecus afarensis, a hominid of the same type as the famous Lucy. But she wanted to get the best guidance possible, so she engaged a footprint expert named Russell Tuttle. Tuttle had done extensive work with various primitive tribes, like the Machiguenga Indians of Peru. After studying the Laetoli footprints, he published his results in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. In discernible features, the Laetoli G prints are indistinguishable from those of habitually barefoot Homo sapiens. In a later article, he stated an equally remarkable conclusion. If the G footprints were not known to be so old, we would readily conclude that they were made by a member of our genus, Homo. Note that Tuttle does not question the age of the footprints. He is operating within the assumption of long ages that evolution requires, and accepts the dates he was given. But in so doing, he releases a shocker for the academic world. These tracks were made by 3 anatomically human individuals some 3.5 million years before there were any in existence. Now, anatomists agree that the human foot, with its characteristic arch and complex structure of bones and ligaments, is unique among creatures that walk. Ape footprints, even those that would be made by extinct species, are markedly different. What then can we make of these prints? Recall the Darwinian rule. Humans developed from ape-like creatures, taking on clearly human anatomical form around 100,000 years ago. By evolutionary standards, there simply could not have been anything living so long ago that could have made them. But there they are. When first I learned of the Laetoli footprints and Dr. Tuttle's study of them, I realized that evolutionists had a major puzzle on their hands. But then, Tuttle's study was published in '89 and '90. Maybe further examination had solved the problem, showing that the researchers had made errors somewhere. But a search of literature turned up another article in Scientific American. This one dated 15 years later. In it, Kate Wong examines the attempts to explain the puzzle, finding them all unsatisfactory. And then she says, "But just as likely, an as yet undiscovered species left the prints. That is to say, consider the world's oldest whodunit an unsolved mystery." So, lacking an explanation for a hopeless contradiction in evolution's storyline, she takes a brave leap of the imagination and opines that there must have been, over 3 million years ago, a race of creatures whose stride and prints look exactly like our unique ones. Isn't it more likely that there is something radically wrong with the evolutionary time scale? And if there is, then there is something fatally wrong with evolution itself, because without long ages to work its molecules to musicians' magic, it fails utterly. Of the many such contradictions in Darwinism, let's see just one more. Here is another of its fundamental assumptions. Our unique ability to speak evolved to give us ability to communicate, thus providing a huge survival advantage. If we assume, as evolutionists do, that humans evolved from lower animals, then our ability to talk was one of the greatest advances in our long climb. Now at last, living creatures could consult with each other, innovate, communicate their inventions, and record those achievements for future generations to build upon. It would have been, evolutionarily, a quantum leap forward. Mark Pagel, however, exposed a baffling contradiction to this assumption in a 2012 article in New Scientist. Around the world today, some 7,000 distinct languages are spoken. That's 7,000 different ways of saying good morning, or it looks like rain. More languages in one species of mammal than there are mammalian species. To put human linguistic diversity into perspective, you could take a gorilla or chimpanzee from its troop and plop it down anywhere these species are found, and it would know how to communicate. You could repeat this with donkeys, crickets, or goldfish and get the same outcome. So, the grunts and screeches of apes are the same the world over, as are the braying of donkeys, the chirping of crickets, and whatever movement cues goldfish display. But we are different. He goes on to say why this is puzzling. This highlights an intriguing paradox at the heart of human communication. If language evolved to allow us to exchange information, how come most people cannot understand what most other people are saying? It seems as if our great leap forward just gave us the means to muddle up our wonderful new tool. As he explains, splitting into distinct cultural and linguistic groups actually brings disadvantages, such as slowing the movement of ideas, technologies, and people. It also makes societies more vulnerable to risks and plain bad luck. So why not have one large group with a shared language? Now, of course, the secular textbooks have an explanation for the existence of different languages, as Pagel points out. We should expect new languages to arise as people spread out and occupy new lands, because as soon as groups become isolated from one another, their languages begin to drift apart and adapt to local needs. But the real puzzle is that the greatest diversity of human societies and languages arises not where people are most spread out, like the Arctic, but where they are most closely packed together, like Papua New Guinea, where neighboring tribes typically speak distinctly different languages. For those of us who haven't visited such places, Pagel provides some details. For anyone interested in languages, the northeastern coastal region of Papua New Guinea is like a well-stocked sweet shop. Korak speakers live right next to Brem speakers, who are just up the coast from Wanamdra speakers, and so on. I once met a man from that area and asked him whether it is true that a different language is spoken every few kilometers. "Oh no," he replied. "They're far closer together than that." Do you feel the force of these observations? Evolutionists all agree that human language is a magnificent triumph of the evolutionary process. We can do complex and sophisticated communication, and none of the lower animals can. But how can it be, then, that evolution has permitted us to ruin the gift by generating thousands of mutually incomprehensible languages? Okay, linguistic drift might explain isolated groups developing different dialects, and, given enough time, really different languages. But how can one explain so many genuinely distinct languages existing in groups right next to one another? In a word, we can't. It flatly contradicts evolution's claim that we evolved language as a communication tool. So then, where are we? Of the many possible examples, we've seen 4 paradoxes within evolutionary theory. A one-way breathing system, present only in birds. But evolved from what? No other vertebrates have anything like it, and one cannot even imagine how it could have evolved out of a bellows-type system, while its subjects continued to breathe all along the way. Then there are human footprints, firmly dated by evolutionists to 3.6 million years ago. And yet, the first anatomically modern humans appeared only some 100,000 years ago. Are they wrong about when humans first appeared? Or wrong about how long ago those footprints were made? The Darwinian scenario won't allow for either explanation. But the footprints are there. And we've seen the blood clotting cascade, comprising some 20 different elements, irreducibly complex. And yet evolution insists that there can't be any irreducibly complex objects or processes, since everything must have evolved gradually from much simpler structures. Try imagining a blood clotting system 1 or 2 steps simpler than the one we all have. Or failing that, imagine trying to survive without a working system. Another stubborn puzzle for Darwinism. And finally, what Mark Pagel has shown us about the existence of multiple languages, blocking communication when evolution says that language evolved to make it possible. The welter of different dialects and languages in places like Papua New Guinea violates a most fundamental rule of evolution, that the ability to speak is a golden tool that gives us a crucial advantage in the struggle to survive. Then, why can't most of us understand what the rest of us are saying. 4 puzzles, enough to keep the most conscientious evolutionists up at night and foster ulcers. And yet there are perfectly simple biblical answers for them all. A one-way breathing system in birds, unique to them? So God created every winged bird according to its kind. Genesis 1:21. A blood coagulation cascade, irreducibly complex? I praise you, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Psalm 139:14. Footprints in volcanic ash, clearly human. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them, male and female? Jesus, Matthew 19:4. And multiple languages that can't be explained by slow linguistic drift of isolated populations? That's why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Genesis 11:9. This is only a sampling of the flaws, paradoxes, and outright contradictions in evolutionary theory. Though they are unwilling to talk about it before the general public, evolutionists have countless puzzles that they can't solve at all. If only they would look up from their desks. As we know, the Bible has solutions for those puzzles, one and all. If you have questions about this lecture, or any of the others in the Good Answers series, you may direct them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.